In 1951, a black-owned insurance company in Mississippi grew so fast, white officials called it a threat to public stability. Their solution? Regulate it to death. Delta Mutual Assurance, founded in Clarksdale, Mississippi, was built by and for black families. They insured homes, farms, businesses, and communities no white company would touch. By 1950, they had over $1 million in active policies, and they were planning expansion into Tennessee and Arkansas. But the state insurance board didn't like what they saw, so they passed a new regulation requiring all high-risk insurers to have double reserve funds. Only one company was targeted, Delta Mutual. They were audited 4 times in 1 year. Their board meetings were rated for compliance reviews. One founder, Paul Estes, was accused of unauthorized underwriting for approving policies without state approval. In 1954, the company was stripped of its license. No fraud, no scandal, just power. And within a year, their building was bought by a white-owned insurer for half its value. Follow for more stories of how Mississippi crushed black success before it could scale.
Hello guys, welcome once again to the channel. I hope wherever you are, you're having a great time. Now, today we're going to talk about different issues that are quite necessary, especially when it comes to black people. You know, the level of which black people have been disenfranchised, they have faced a lot of challenges in the United States and the rest of the world is quite appalling, because if you look at the growth by black people, their successes have always been sabotaged left, right, and center. When they try to create new things, they are always not given credit for the inventions that they make. And if you look at even the inventions that exist currently, many of them were made by blacks, but then they were hijacked by white people, and therefore all these kind of things are attributed to white people. And that really has made them think, and many people have always thought, that black people have nothing to offer in the world. But that is not the case. So I came across a clip here that is quite truth-telling. It is about an Asian lady who was speaking about the experiences of black people in the United States and the rest of the world. And then there is someone who came to her comment section and asked her one question. Why do you think there is this concerted effort by whites to continue destroying everything that black people are making? If it is about their towns and their cities, they are always targeted. Once they make them, they are targeted and brought down. Remember the Black Wall Street? That was destroyed because they didn't want black people to have thriving economy. So there is this concerted effort by all elites in the globe to really make black people fail at all cost. That is why I want us to listen to what she had to say about this clip and other clips that talk about the same issue. Then in the end, I will give my commentary. But before we delve in, please, if you're watching us for the first time, consider subscribing to the channel. We promise you a great experience. And also remember, you can also be part of our membership to help support the work we do in this channel. Let's now dive in.
Thank you for setting me up to talk about this. I know that you and many other black people know the answer, but it is something that I'm still processing, and it hits me really hard in the gut. And so I want people to understand that I am answering the question, what do I know? Not speaking for anyone. Many commenters today have pointed out how many affluent black towns have been created and destroyed throughout United States history. And most non-black people know about the Tulsa Massacre, Black Wall Street, Lake Lanier. But it was many black towns. One commenter said over 60. And it's not that some black people sometimes were able to establish a successful community that accumulated wealth. It's that black people were consistently able to go anywhere and together establish strong communities that accumulated wealth and had education systems and businesses and were thriving. And every time it happened, people destroyed them. And then as you progress through time, it becomes less acceptable to burn and flood and massacre entire towns. So again, you have the passing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and the United States opens the door to Asian immigration in 1965. The United States has a long history of using immigrants to get in the way of black people. And so I think that this system of using immigrant-owned businesses in black communities is designed to siphon wealth away from Black communities. And another commenter asked me, why do I think that people are afraid of letting Black people build their communities and accumulate wealth and to thrive? And we see it so many times. It's because they fear revenge, because they know what they have done to Black people. But again, we have been told that if Black people wanted revenge, it would have happened already. That is not what they want. And I think that people think that the violence and exploitation and abuse of power that they have exacted upon Black people and all Black, brown, indigenous, and people of color is a universal human trait, and that if anybody has that wealth and power, then they would return that evil in kind. But it's not. It is specific to, and all Black people want is to be allowed to thrive and accumulate wealth and exist as other people have been allowed to do. I find that a good way to help people who have a different lived experience than you exercise empathy for the struggles that you face that they may not be familiar with is to help them understand. And I was hoping that you could help me understand what anti-white racism looks like. Can you tell me about how you don't know where your ancestors came from because they were kidnapped and enslaved? Or how you don't know what languages they spoke, what spiritual practices they had, or what traditional knowledge that should have been your birthright was lost, not because they were allowed to and wanted to assimilate, but because their enslavers or residential schools forced them to assimilate. Can you tell me about how your ancestors had explosives tied to them while they were building the United States railroads, and then as a show of appreciation, they were excluded from society for nearly 60 years? And could you tell me about the hundreds of towns that were destroyed, like the Black towns and Chinatowns and Japan towns, all destroyed by the same demographic? Can you tell me about the children who were unalived because they whistled at a woman or because they floated in a lake a little too far past the segregation line? And can you tell me how it was for your parents and your grandparents to be United States citizens who were put in internment camps on United States soil? Can you tell me how it was for your family to live in the back of their store because people who look like you were not allowed to purchase or rent homes? And could you tell me how it was for your parents and for you to shed blood, to be treated as human, as equal, and to be allowed to simply share the same space as other people? Can you tell me about the conversations that you have to have with your children about police interactions? And could you tell me about how your mother and your sisters and your daughters are concerned about having children because of lack of equitable access to healthcare, because doctors were told that people who look like you can't feel pain? Can you tell me how it feels to know that your ancestors lived here for thousands of years, but when you try to come here, you and your children are put in cages? And can you tell me how it felt when a few years ago, the president entertained having people who look like you expelled from the country again? Can you tell me what anti-white racism looks like beyond having your feelings hurt, feeling uncomfortable, and having your sense of superiority challenged? And when you're done telling me what anti-white racism feels like for you, could you please tell me why you're not fighting to end racism for everybody? Yes, this is really important. Asian Americans were redlined from opening businesses in white neighborhoods because white people didn't want Asian Americans operating in their neighborhoods and didn't want Asian Americans profiting off of white people. But because the positionality of Asian Americans is weaponized to oppress Black people, Asian Americans were being given loans to open businesses in Black communities, even though Black people were not able to receive loans to open businesses in their own communities.
The best victim is a dead victim, and racism quite literally kills, but people refuse to see it for the public health crisis that it is. I've been reading Plundered by Professor Atuhene, which talks about how predatory governance and illegally inflating property taxes quite literally led to the demise of Detroit and caused one of the most wealthiest cities with a huge Black population to lose so much of the generational wealth that was meant to be passed on to their children. The city of Detroit has more property tax foreclosures than any other American city since the Great Depression. As of 2009, the local government has confiscated 1 in 3 homes, robbing over 100,000 families of wealth, stability, and the relationships that they have developed with neighbors over the decades. Between 2009 and 2015, the city of Detroit inflated the market value of 53 to 84% of its homes, violating the Michigan's constitutional rule on how to properly calculate property taxes, resulting in the city of Detroit overtaxing homeowners by at least $600 million. Out of the 63,000 Detroit homes that had delinquent tax debt in 2019, the city overtaxed about 90% of them. The systemic overtaxation has caused an enormous transfer of wealth from homeowners in this majority Black city to government coffers. The professor goes on to talk about this intergenerational phenomenon called root shock, which is the traumatic stress reaction to the destruction of all or part of one's emotional ecosystem, which causes weakened communities more vulnerable to negative forces, chronic illness, and even death. Racism kills. The professor highlights how it is a combination of racist policies such as racial covenants, urban renewal, redlining, blockbusting, predatory mortgage lending, and illegally inflated property tax assessments that are to blame for why so many Black people in the city of Detroit lost their homes. But instead, like we tend to do with systemic issues and systemic racism, we put the blame on the individual, saying that they have some sort of character or moral flaw that caused them to be in that position. There are so many racist policies that combine to make this issue. You have to have a multi-hyphenated and a multifaceted approach to systemic racism. Although this book is focused on Detroit, this is also the story in so many other cities in this country that have majority Black populations. I would highly recommend this book for people to truly understand the many factors that are prohibiting Black people from generating wealth in this country. I will be adding this book to my list of additional resources if any of y'all are interested in learning more about the racial wealth gap. It's linked in my bio. You can give me a follow and watch my previous videos. Thank you for tuning in. Okay, bye.
Obviously, the issue of Asian American owned businesses operating in Black communities is a huge source of tension because it is part of the daily violence faced by Black people in their own communities when they are disrespected as customers, to the literal physical violence, as was the case of the salon in Brooklyn, where a Black woman was locked into the salon by workers while they beat her with broomsticks, to the damage done to the psyches of particularly Black children when they are accused of shoplifting. And this isn't a topic that I'm going to be able to cover in one video, but it is a conversation that I do want to start. I think that if you ask some people what was the source of the tension, they'll say the LA riots and what happened in Koreatown, but you cannot mention the LA riots without recognizing the unaliving of Latasha Harlins the year before. A 15-year-old girl who was unalived by an Asian shop owner who thought that she was shoplifting orange juice, but the money to pay for the orange juice was in her hand when she was unalived. To overlook that is to value profit and property over Black bodies, which is at the root of the United States systemically racist system and capitalism. But I think that we have to go all the way back to the Civil Rights Amendment of 1964 and then the opening of Asian immigration in 1965. So in 1964, white power structure almost faced accountability to Black people. Black people should have started to be able to receive loans to open businesses in their own communities. But instead, in 1965, the United States opened the door to Asian immigration, and redlining meant that Asian Americans were receiving business loans, but only to open businesses in Black communities, and Black people were still not receiving loans to open businesses in their own communities. So where you have this weaponized positionality of Asian Americans being put in Black people's way, of course you are going to have resentment not only over the supplanted opportunity to open businesses in their communities, but also over the fact that the Black dollar is now being paid out twice. Once when the customer pays for the goods or services, and then again when the Asian business owner removes that wealth from the Black community. And I frequently heard the tension being framed as mutual misunderstanding, where these Asian shop owners didn't know about the civil rights struggles of Black people, and Black people were not familiar with the culture of Asian business owners. But I don't think that it can be framed as mutual misunderstanding where there is an uneven power dynamic. You have one demographic that is the business owners, and you have the other demographic that is having to pay. So where there is uneven power, I don't think that it's accurate to frame it as mutual misunderstanding. So my ancestors were asked by white men to come to this country, which they had stolen and forced black people to build, because they were hoping that my ancestors would be the new cheap and disposable labor to undercut the recently freed black people that lazy white men didn't want to pay. And when my ancestors wouldn't do that, they were lynched and massacred, their towns were destroyed, they were blown up while building the railroads, and ultimately they were excluded from society in the country for nearly 60 years. Then when the United States asked us to come back in the 1960s because they wanted to put us in the way of black people again, and the United States needed to rehabilitate its reputation with Asian countries that were gaining in economic and political power, we had civil rights because of black people. You're obviously not aware of this, but blessed is not a word that the global majority thinks of in association with Europeans. Words like plague and colonizer, maybe, but not blessed. And the cell phone in my hand came from China. So I don't know if you're referencing Steve Jobs or Martin Cooper or the Finnish inventor who created the first pocket-sized telecommunication device in 1917, and you probably don't know either because your education system has left you terribly ignorant and without the critical thinking skills necessary to effectively gather information. Because you believe that most great inventions can be attributed to one white person, as opposed to recognizing that the patent system is how white people colonize intellectual property. We would not have cell phones if it wasn't for the creation of the gamma electrical cell by black inventor Henry T. Sampson. And most of our cell phones would not have microphones in them if it wasn't for the particular microphone that was created by black inventor James Edward West. The creation of the first digital network, 1G, was launched in Japan, and then black electrical engineer Jesse Russell pioneered the creation of 2G, which launched in Finland first. 3G launched in Japan, 4G launched in Norway, 5G launched in South Korea, and 30% of the world's cell phones are manufactured in China. Because we, of the global majority, recognize that collective humanity has the ingenuity and creativity of one another to thank, whereas a lot of European Americans are laboring under the delusion that the rest of us have white people to thank. And it's this narcissistic ignorance that causes people like you to do embarrassing things, like leaving comments about Europeans and cell phones on a video about systemic anti-black racism in the United States. And while that could be written off as a comedic and senile non sequitur, we recognize it as a desperate attempt to center yourself in a conversation that has nothing to do with you. The irony being that white people like to say not all white people and they shouldn't be held accountable for the misdeeds of their ancestors, yet they want to be associated with the greatness of the things that they think they invented. So, John Michael Kohler was an American who invented the bathtub in 1883. But let's think about this critically. Do you really think that nobody took a bath until John Michael Kohler invented the bathtub in 1883? Doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So what he was talking about is the fact that Africans introduced bathing and the concept of personal hygiene to Western Europe in order to build a healthier society during the 800-year occupation of Spain. In particular, a man by this name introduced the practices of bathing, shaving, and using toothpaste, as well as drastically improving the eating habits of Western Europeans. Additionally, the first recorded history of people taking baths was in India in 500 BC. A lot of us have gotten used to how little history some people like you know, particularly where it comes to anything not Eurocentric. However, I have a tip. Before you make a comment like this, do a quick Google search for whatever you think the topic at hand is. In this case, who invented bathing or who introduced bathing to Europe, and then decide whether you still want to make this comment. Hey buddy, your comment needs some help because when Dr. Earl Haas patented the tampon in 1931, he got the idea from his friend. She used a sponge because before this, women around the globe had been using tampons for thousands of years. There was a medical document that described the use of papyrus tampons that came from Egypt around the 15th century BCE. And I think what you meant to say was this modernized world was made possible by labor and ideas stolen by white greedy bad men exploited for ruthless capitalism. Because you are yet another narcissist who's been indoctrinated by the education system to lack the critical thinking skills to understand that patenting does not equal invention. Patenting is the colonization of intellectual property, because invention usually requires the collective efforts of a diverse group of people over time. As I tell my students when they're having difficulty learning something, try to be patient and don't be too hard on yourself. The ability to apply logical reasoning to historical fact isn't going to make sense to somebody who watches a video correcting an erroneous comment about the 1800s who responds with stay in the 21st century. But it's okay, we all have our strong suits. Being an ignorant bigot isn't mine, and intelligence isn't yours, but I'm sure there are things that you're good at that you can focus on and celebrate. And if you'd like to get better at being intelligent, again, be patient, practice every opportunity that you have, and I'm sure that you can improve. I hope that helps. Important facets of my personality include kindness and empathy and the courage to speak up against wrongdoing, which is why I spend a lot of time advocating for dismantling white culture and explaining the history of current forms of systemic oppression. And my original intent was to encourage Asian Americans to engage in anti-racist work and to unlearn anti-Black bias. But who knew? There are so many narcissistic white people who show up to center themselves in conversations that don't have to have anything to do with them unless they identify with race, white supremacy culture, and upholding forms of systemic oppression.
Now, listening to the lady, I think she's done justice to the entire topic. And even others who have given their opinions about how blacks have always been sabotaged, they know it. It is something that is seen. While the governance structures might not agree that there is a sense in which the systems have been created to sabotage black people, but the truth exists and black people know that there are always many, many instances where their growth is being sabotaged in almost every aspect. So, how has this happened and why has it happened? The historical economic sabotage. White elites have historically undermined black economic success to maintain racial and economic hierarchies. The destruction of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 is a prime example. A thriving black community, Greenwood, was burned to the ground by a white mob with estimates of up to 300 deaths and over 1,200 businesses and homes destroyed. This was not a random violence, but a targeted effort to dismantle a prosperous black economy that challenged white supremacy. You know, the reason why they want us to always continue being subservient to them is the fact that they want white supremacy to continue reigning supreme over black people. They want blacks to be at the mercy of whites. And therefore, if blacks create something for themselves, there must be an effort to really eliminate or destroy that entire creation to the ground. And that is what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Black Wall Street was burned down and destroyed by white supremacists who did not want blacks to have a thriving economy. Systemic and policy barriers. Throughout the 20th century, policies like redlining prevented black Americans from accessing home ownership and wealth-building opportunities. White elites in government and banking enforced these discriminatory practices, ensuring black communities remained economically disadvantaged. For instance, the GI Bill after World War II disproportionately benefited white veterans, as black veterans were often denied loans and housing in desirable areas, stifling their economic progress. So this really tells you what is happening. They will never allow blacks to grow. And if blacks have found a way to grow despite the many challenges that they have, they will create policies that really undermine their growth. And that is what is happening. When I talk about this issue, sometimes I feel very emotional because knowing what black people have gone through over the years, you wonder why up to now, still people would not appreciate the fact that racism has existed, the fact that blacks have been disenfranchised in many aspects, the fact that blacks need some affirmative action to catch up with their white counterparts, and many other things that come with it. In fact, even if you hear people talk about reparations, some whites think blacks don't deserve it because that is free money. They feel they're not directly responsible for the slavery and the persecutions that happened to blacks. This is quite surprising for me. Cultural and educational suppression. Black achievements in education and culture have been systematically devalued or erased. Elite institutions controlled by white gatekeepers often excluded black scholars and artists or minimized their contributions. The Harlem Renaissance, a black cultural boom in the 1920s, faced censorship and marginalization by white publishers and critics, limiting its broader impact and economic rewards for black creators. Just listen to how many instances blacks have had to grow, but then their growth has been sabotaged or even limited by white supremacists. It is not easy for blacks, and it is not easy being a black person in the United States. The criminal justice system has been weaponized to disrupt black advancement. During the civil rights era, white elites supported policies that targeted black leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, using surveillances and incarceration to silence them. The war on drugs in the 1980s further disproportionately targeted black communities, leading to mass incarceration and economic devastation, undermining black families and businesses. Ongoing wealth disparities. Today, white elites in corporate and political spheres perpetuate wealth gaps through unequal access to capital and opportunities. The destruction of Black Wall Street set a precedent for systemic sabotage, reflecting in modern disparities like the racial wealth gap, where the median white household has 10 times the wealth of the median black household. These patterns show a consistent effort to limit black economic and social power. And this is what is happening in America to black people. How will blacks get an opportunity to grow and really cover for these kind of disadvantages that they have had? It behooves them to come together. It behooves them to really find a way through which they can support black businesses, and they can also support each other within their communities, as it were. You can share your thoughts down in the comment section. And if you're watching us for the first time, please remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share. Thank you. Let's meet on the next one.